we're definitely giving very strong signals as a society about how people are supposed to behave, and we all internalize this as we grow up, and that shapes different dynamics. Because we're focused on advancing women's leadership, we want to make sure people understand where all of this is coming from so that they can take actions to block these dynamics from happening, and then leverage some of these tools to actually have better team meetings. Ultimately, while we're providing this sort of leadership knowledge with the gendered lens, it's really just about good leadership. Because all kinds of people are left out of the conversation. Young people who are seen as not having enough experience to have anything to offer. Older people, we also as a society think they're less competent. So, which is ridiculous when you think about it, right? Young people have things to offer, older people. So we really need to be cognizant of these things, and if we focus on these tips here, we can make the team dynamic much stronger and get more value out of our teams. The third thing is to ask framing questions. So having sort of a higher purpose for the team meeting. And our suggestion here is, what is our bigger goal today? Or what can we do in this meeting to create more value? And that refocuses the conversation. So we've talked about, the airtime dominator and people talking a lot and maybe not actually having a lot to say. So this is an idea of how do you rein that in, right? How can there's a few different ways. I mean, depending on how much someone is interrupting or dominating, you can take them aside later and either say, if you're the manager of the team, and say, I know you have a lot to say and you're really enthusiastic, but I can see that you're talking a lot and it's kind of making other people have less time to offer something on their own. Or you can just ask these framing questions. So women are often the target of interruptions. Interestingly, someone just did a study. It was sort of an informal study where she went to different meetings. She works in the technology industry, and she went to several different meetings. I think it was maybe like 15 hours of meetings, and she kind of kept track of who was interrupting whom, the gender dynamics, and the seniority levels. And she found that men were 3 times as likely to interrupt women as they were to interrupt other men. And women interrupt each other constantly and almost never interrupt men. So also, the more senior the speaker, the more they interrupted. Right? And what was interesting is that the 3 most senior women in these meetings interrupted the most. And they interrupted everyone, were kind of agnostic about who they interrupted. And she makes the point that it may be that in order to get to senior levels for women, because their expertise isn't automatically granted, and their voices aren't automatically heard and given that credibility, that they actually have to develop this capacity to interrupt in order to kind of state their claim and get their voice heard, which is just an interesting observation. So for those of us who tend to be kind of hanging back a little bit in meetings, I think that can be good, but there may be moments to assert ourselves more forcefully. Like the people at work who interrupt a lot, just take notes on what they do. How do they phrase it, right? A lot of it too, I think, is sort of body language. And just kind of I like literally almost like pushing people away, not actually sort of in your physical space. I don't know if it's polite, and I think that's kind of the issue, is that even though I think we should be polite, when appropriate, if you feel like your voice isn't being heard, developing a space to give yourself permission to not be polite. Maybe you can reframe it as less about you being rude, more about the fact that you have a lot to offer, and you need to get it out so your team can hear it. So what is bias? And the way social psychologists view bias is that it's just an error in our decision making. And that stereotypes about men and women and what they're like lead to these errors in decision making, because when we're evaluating people, we just assume we think we know what they have to offer. We make these assumptions, and we tend to rely on what we think we know about people when we're evaluating and assessing them. What the research has shown, for the most part, is that culturally we think men are slightly more competent than women at most things. And they're especially more competent in these male domains, so science, technology, engineering, finance. And so it's a small difference, but it's enough of a difference to make an impact or to bias our assessments of men and women. So So then these stereotypes become filters through which we process information. There's a lot of information coming at us all the time. We only consciously process like a percent of it. But 99% is really automatic and our unconscious is processing it. What's processing it is these stereotypes. So stereotypes are a filter through which all this information comes at us. So in general, women are perceived by others to be less of an expert than men, and then they tend to have less influence in groups. And therefore their unique knowledge, or what they're uniquely contributing to a group, is more readily discounted and not heard. So we're not always able then to recognize in a group who has what to offer, and we're not able to leverage the true power of a group. I mean, ostensibly, if you bring a team together of people who have expertise in different areas, because it's that combination together that's going to enable you to do a better job. But these gender stereotypes actually make that less possible and less likely unless we do things to correct. The final thing we talk about is mastering effective introductions. So because women, sort of the theme is that they have less to offer and that they're less of an expert than men, we can help to offset that by introducing women with their qualifications and what their amazing talents are. And this stems from research that, just simplify this study a little bit, but a professor had a graduate student who was a teaching assistant. They did this study 2 different ways. The first way, she was introduced to the students she would be teaching as just, this is just my graduate student so-and-so. And then the next way they did it, he talked about her accomplishments and her experiences, and the students rated her higher on leadership when that introduction was given about like what she's accomplished and how brilliant she is and these other things. So you can imagine where you're introducing your colleague and you say, she's so great to work with, she's super friendly and warm. Right? Or you could say, this is so-and-so my colleague, she is one of our top performers, and she did this for this team project, and it was an amazing contribution and enabled us to, roll this out on time and budget. Right? There's just 2 different ways, and we often we tend to describe women more by their personality, and that does nothing to offset the automatic assumption that we're less of experts to begin with. So you almost, to undo that, you want to really think strategically about, first of all, how you're introducing your other colleagues. Again, I think this matters for your younger colleagues, anybody really. The endorsements that we write on LinkedIn about people, and then the way we describe ourselves. Working with someone to create a way of introducing yourself that talks about your accomplishments in a way that you're more comfortable with will really help you, and it will really help offset these other dynamics that women encounter.